Welcome back to Pistons Jack Chats. Well, I'll have a guest from the Pistons and NBA community join me each and every week to discuss your Detroit Pistons. Before we get started, if you could please, I'd be super grateful if you could please drop a like, comment, subscribe. It all just helps keep the channel growing. But let's get into it. Today, I have a very special guest. I have the co-host of the Pistons Pulse and Game Theory podcast with Sam Vecini, Bryce Simon, aka MotorCity Hoops. Bryce, what's going on, my man?
What's up, Jack? How are you doing, man? Very excited for you and everything you have going on with all the content you're creating. You're doing great things, and it's really cool to see your rise and your growth and everything. Peek behind the curtain. Me and you go way back before Pistons Jack, before a lot of this stuff, and so it's really cool to see everything you're doing.
Oh man, I wasn't expecting that, but thank you so much. And yeah, you know, I swear I say this every time we're on together, but you were the first person to ever reply to me all the way back in 2021. You were always there. You've always been there for me to help me with anything and always reached out. And it was cool. We got to meet inside at Summer League a couple of years ago. So yeah, it's crazy that we're here now. But super excited to have you on because in my opinion, you're probably the most how can I put this without being disrespectful? Just the way you see the game and break it down makes it so easy.
Boring. Boring
fans.
Is the word you were
looking
for.
You do it. You do it in a way that's palatable to because I don't consider myself an absolute basketball junkie, but you make the game easy to understand for us. So awesome to have you on.
Yeah, no, that's honestly one of the biggest compliments I get is when people read the Substack or listen to the pod or whatever, and they're like, "Hey, you're helping me learn the game better." And that was never necessarily what I'm trying to do. Like, I don't think I'm know anything more than anybody else, but it's always really cool to hear that, the Substack, who would have thought that I could just put my raw notes, not paragraph form. It's just like, I'm just like typing away as I watch the game and people actually, take it in and enjoy reading it. And maybe they can learn some things here or there or watch the game a certain way they wouldn't have otherwise. That is very meaningful to me.
Absolutely. And we'll have all the links to all your work in the description below, of course, with all the stuff you've got going on. Some days you're doing Nick's Film School podcast. The next year is Sam Vecini. The next year with KOC.
Yeah.
Kevin O'Connor.
Hey,
I'm just this guy's everywhere.
What helps is the Pistons are winning basketball games. I don't think Kevin O'Connor's looking for somebody to come on and talk Pistons if they're not winning basketball games. And so that was pretty cool. I've had the opportunity to do that. Obviously, game theory is awesome. Nick's Film School. The front office show is something I listened to for a long time. So the fact I've got to know Keith and Trevor the way I have, and then beyond that was some pretty surreal opportunities. I really appreciate that.
No, it's incredible. And I'm going to put a link to the KOC interview in particular here because that was really good listening. It was from a couple of weeks ago, I think, but I really, really enjoyed that on top of everything else. But Bryce, I just said to you before we got going, this might be the most positive outline I've ever written. This team, where I normally open this show is just with the vibes. Now, I know you're not necessarily a Pistons fan through and through. You've been covering the team for, I think, 5 seasons now since 2020.
This is the 5th season that I've covered, content created, whatever you want to call it. The team is about to win the most games I've ever watched. The Detroit. That's the thing is I didn't get the bad boys. I didn't get the going to work. All I've seen is the rebuild, and 23 wins is the most I have watched this team. And right now they're at 21, which is crazy.
It's crazy. But the Pistons right now, I believe, are 8th in the East, have a 21-19 record. They're half a game back from the 6th seed. 1 full game behind the Pacers at 5, who they play on Thursday. Just the vibes checks, Bryce. How are you feeling watching this team night in, night out? Because I know you watch every single minute. So just from maybe a content creator's perspective and just someone who covers the team, what's it like watching this team compared to other seasons?
Omari and I have joked recently, we got to go watch the game in person in Denver, which maybe I'm the bad luck because that is the game they've lost recently that everybody will remember, that we actually get to talk about basketball, right? This team is so much fun that we're not already talking NBA draft. And we talked a little bit of deadline, but it's not like super specific in terms of, oh, they need to go do this or that, or, whatever. It's kind of just, what do they do? Should they keep this thing rolling? Should they make a move? Whatever. But we get to talk about Jalen Duren's ball screen defense. We get to talk about Ron Holland's point of attack defense. Here's what's fun. Cade Cunningham is incredible, Jack. But because they're winning, we can actually still critique him without feeling like it's been overly negative, right? So we can talk about how he's an all-star while at the same time talking about, okay, which his handle was a little tighter at times, or the decision-making or whatever. That's what makes this fun, is there's so many positives, and then the things you just nitpick and critique don't seem like it's just all negative.
Absolutely. It's so right. Like, you can actually have that constructive criticism about a player, and you're not labeled a hater, or you don't have people attacking you in comments on Twitter or wherever you post content. Like, it's such a nice feeling. And it's so right. Like, one thing now that, like, this season's the first time I've got to watch like every game live start to finish. And it is, even when they had like a couple of losing streaks and I was feeling a bit negative, it is so refreshing to just be, for a full 48 minutes of a game, you're just locked in every possession. There's no like, oh, when they're going to make a trade, they need to fire this person, that person. Like, I've talked trades with people. Obviously, it's natural, but like, barely touched on the NBA draft. Like, it's the most refreshing thing ever, and it's the most emotionally drained I've been watching this team. But it's just been incredible.
I mean, I think about it with our Pistons Pulse episodes where we just recorded. And so after the fact, after you guys listen to this, go check that out if you haven't. But we go over an hour really easy because it's like, man, we still want some other things to talk about. Where last year it was, okay, let's put this really detailed outline together, because if not, we may run out of things to discuss. And so it's just fun. The vibes are good. The vets, their energy seems to be really good. And here's the thing, even if they weren't winning, which the winning is great, Jack, and they may lose some games. They're going to lose some games coming up at a certain point, but it's competitive. It looks like a basketball team. And that's what makes it fun to create content about this team.
Absolutely. And it just like, well, I'm going to get into this in a moment, but just like, there's a real culture, and just like, I guess this takes me to the first topic I want to talk about. The last 3 weeks of Pistons basketball, something seems to have switched. They're 10-2 in that stretch. Unfortunately, you were at one of those 2 losses in Denver. But it all started with that after the Jazz game at home. That was a disappointing loss. They then went on the road to Phoenix, and we know the rest from there. But they're 10-2, third best record in the NBA during this span, 6th best offense, middle of the pack defensively, 7th best net rating. Like, what is the biggest change you've seen in the past 3 weeks?
I think the word that I would use to describe this team this year is respond. I wrote that in a recent Substack article where they respond. So you mentioned what started this was a loss to the Utah Jazz, right? The Utah Jazz, and they're 11-17. And it's like, oh man, like maybe the vibe. Then what do? They go on the the West Coast trip. And no, maybe that one was at home. So then they go on the West Coast trip. They beat Phoenix. They beat the Lakers. They beat the Kings on a shot that ended up, unfortunately, getting Mike Brown fired, and then they do lose to the Nuggets. So it's like, okay, well, maybe, who knows? And then they go on a 5-game winning streak. So then they drop the Warriors game, right? Like, kind of a tough game. It ended up getting closer at the end. How do they respond to that? They win 2 games. They go on the road. Even in the Knicks game, Jack, on Monday night, that was a rough first half for Cade Cunningham. He has 4 fouls and 7 points, I believe, starting the second half. And then he takes over Madison Square Garden. This team responds. You could even point to the Jay Ivey injury. What do? They respond to it. Other guys pick up. This is ability to respond and a resolve that we just haven't seen in any of the years. Last year was a complete dumpster fire, but even some of the other years, and I like Dwayne Casey, we did not see this level of response over the last 5 years that I've watched this team.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. Like, they do not lie down. Like, and I think since the Ivy injury, which still sucks because we'll talk about him in a minute, but I think he was playing some awesome basketball. But like, even within that game, like, you have Tobias Harris and Tim Hardaway Jr. step up in that fourth. There's just Cade's been kind of the main guy, obviously, but there's always a player or two stepping up. Like last night, Marcus Sasser hits a ridiculous step back three with 5 minutes to go over Jalen Brunson in those non-Cade minutes. Possession later, like takes it to the rack and then dumps it off to JD. Like, and I know maybe might be unsustainable if they don't make a move at some point. Like you said, they're going to lose some games, but they just don't give up. They keep fighting back. They were down to the Hornets by like 20 in that first half at home. I think they were down to the Warriors by like 18, come back. Like, they just don't lie down. And I think it's an attribute to the culture and JB Bickerstaff and just everything they're building there.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of guys, right? Everything starts with Cade. He deserves all the credit, but Trajan bringing in the right veterans, not just with their skill sets, but their personalities, seems like it's made sense. JB deserves a lot of credit. I think something that stood out with me with this team, even again, this Knicks game is another example. What they get up, they got up 13-11 or something like that in the first quarter, and they lost the lead. We've seen that team over even last year, as bad as that team was, they would get your hopes up with like, oh, here's a great first quarter. They're up by 10, 12 points. And then they immediately lose the lead. And then what happens? They never losing a 13-point lead and all the momentum the way they did on the road to a good Knicks team. And then sustaining. Think about some of the overtime games they've won. Think about the Heat game where they lose the lead the second time to Hero, go to overtime, got down by 8, and then Tim Hardaway Jr. goes crazy. As you mentioned, maybe not sustainable, but it still happened. And I cannot take credit for this stat, and I don't even have it exactly right, but they're like 16-2 when entering the fourth quarter with the lead this year, something like that. Just incredible. That was actually the Knicks broadcast. That's when I download it from Synergy. I just am at the mercy of whatever they chose to be. And so a lot of times I get the opponents. And so, yeah, they were 16-2 entering last night's game. And so after last night's win, 17-2 when entering the fourth quarter with a lead. That's big time finishing from a young, a bunch of young guys playing on the floor.
That's huge. And that kind of, it surprises me but it doesn't, because I feel like earlier in the season, I want to say we're 40 games in now. Those first 20 games, or definitely the first 15, it felt like they would get maybe a 8 to 10 point lead in the fourth and let it run away.
Yeah.
And it feels like that's flipped. And I've spoken a bit about it on our post-game shows with Austin, who's jumped on a few times, and he brought up like this team feels like they've almost the team from October, November. It feels like a way different, like they've elevated so much within the season, which I think is such a positive outcome, because I think Pistons fans are quite conditioned to, oh, well, you know, because I think they were like 10-15, 10-16 at one stage. And I think a lot of Pistons fans like, oh, well, it's just going to be like, they're probably going to win their 28 games, but they're going to, let's start looking at the draft and trades just for a minute there. But they've actually just improved as they've gelled more. And it's super encouraging.
You know what? It's contagious, Jack. And one thing I don't like, we'll see if this team goes through another losing streak at some point. You know, it's funny to think they started the season 0-4, like on a 4-game, but winning builds on itself, right? And so like vibes stay good when you're winning and it feels good and you figure out what it takes. And so I think that's a huge part of it. If they've seen the process work, and when you see the process work, it's easier to dive into it more and believe in it more. And it just continues to snowball in that way.
Absolutely. And last thing on this topic, you played D1 hoops at American University, if I'm correct there.
Yeah. Yep.
I think something like that I've gone back to is that 3-game winning streak on the out west. Does that confidence you build there and that like feed into a resiliency to know you can come back from these games? And like, is that a real thing that maybe fans who haven't played a high level basketball kind of might underestimate?
Yeah, I've always told people 2 things gave me confidence. One, I was not a star player. I was a role player. So one thing that gave me confidence was our star player. Our best player was Derek Mercer. He was our point guard. He was tough, from Jersey City, big time player, high school coach up in Jersey now. Still talk to him to this day. When I could look at Derek and see the confidence in his eyes, it made me more confident. I was more confident walking on the floor because I knew I had him. And listen, some of my other teammates as well. We had a big time shooter, Garrison Carr, Brian Gill. I can't say all their names, but Derek especially, he was the guy I would point to. Like, I get confidence from him. I think Cade is at that level with his teammates, right? Like, I think you can look at Cade and feel confident. And then we loved going on the road. I loved road trips, and we didn't travel like NBA players, right? We had to ride the bus, but we played games in the hotel. We would play games. We'd have these silly games like where we'd name NBA players. So if I said Cade Cunningham, you'd have to name a player whose first name started with a C. Like we just developed this chemistry on the road, and then you go. There's nothing sweeter, Jack, than hitting a shot and hearing the silence of a road crowd. To me, that's more fun than the roar of a home crowd. And so I'm sure there was something that was built over those road trips and the wins and feeling it actually come to fruition.
And that's awesome insight. I love that. And I'm with you, even just as a fan watching NBA basketball, I've always enjoyed when the away team gets that win. Whether they're an underdog or not, I don't care. Like if it's a close game, I'm going for the away side because I love like the shock and that silence in the stands. Even if you got the home commentary team, it's always funny. But you brought up just then Cade Cunningham and how much the star player can kind of galvanize a team. This question here might seem a little bit far-fetched, but just bear with me. Is Cade Cunningham a legit All-NBA candidate? And I ask you specifically because you do a lot of Piston stuff clearly, but you're also on the Game Theory pod, and I know you keep tabs across the league and try and keep up with it all. But Cade's currently giving you 25 points, 7 boards, 9 assists on 46, 38, 80 splits, 38% on pull-up threes, third in the NBA for assists per game, and third in the NBA for triple doubles. Am I crazy for thinking he's like in the conversation for third team All NBA?
You are not. You're not crazy for him being in the conversation. I was talking to somebody about this today. I don't think he's going to end up on it. I'm actually about to do this exercise tomorrow or Thursday because we're recording our midseason awards on Game Theory. So I haven't really dove into it. I will say this: Cade is 100% an all-star. And we should prepare ourselves just a little bit because the fan vote could screw all of this up, because the fan vote can put people on the all-star team that shouldn't be. And then all of a sudden people get left off. I don't think that's going to happen to Cade, especially with how he's been playing. I'm a little bit nervous. But I think they've won enough games. He'll be okay. But in my book, he's 100% an all-star. No doubt. No questions. I think he ends up in the all-NBA conversation because you got to remember there's a games played limit. Luka is out of that. Paolo and Franz are out of that. So you take some of these guys out on, are the Celtics going to automatically get 2 guys if they don't keep winning games? Like there's some of those things that are coming into play now. And so I think he's in the conversation. I think whether or not he ends up on it comes down to wins, Jack. Like if they end up, as the 6th seed in the East and, a handful of games over 500, he may find himself on there. Here's the thing that's sneaky interesting. The cap hit goes up by $8 million next year if he and so that literally could be the difference between keeping Malik Beasley and not. Now they could still maybe just get him on the non-tax MLE, but there are some other implications here that it may be better for him not to make the All-NBA team.
I love that you brought that up because our guy Carl Metz.
Yes, that's who I was talking. That's who I was talking to today. Yes.
That's so funny. I think it was after yesterday's game or the game before. Immediately after the win, he's in the post-game chat saying, "We might not want Cade to make All-NBA because of that exact reason." It's a very fair reason. Just the timing he brought it up was funny. But staying on Cade for a little bit here. What would you say has been his biggest area of growth this season? And then just on the tail end of that, where's his biggest area for improvement?
I think you already said it, Jack. You brought up the pull up 3-point shooting. That unlocks so much. I think everybody understands this, but part of the reason Steph Curry and Dame and even Trae Young can think about where you have to guard those guys, right? Now, Cade's never going to be a deep 3-point shooter like that. That'd be really hard to develop, I think, at this point in his career, but even as a young player. But if you can't go under a ball screen on Cade Cunningham, you're in trouble because he can gel you. He can snake you. If you want to drop, he's going to pull up and hit the mid-range. I think the confidence, and think about how he started that second half against the Knicks, coming in, knocking down threes, and we know it's a more efficient shot. So I think that's the biggest area of growth for him. So I've gone back and forth whether I want to continue to see the defensive growth or the finishing at the rim. I do think he's grown defensively. I think he's probably more neutral now than he was early in the season, where I thought it was actually above neutral. I think I'll go with the finishing at the rim, either the finishing at the rim or getting to the free throw line. I think that's the next step.
Definitely. And I think just with I want to get your take on this. I'm sure you said it before on your own podcasts and shows, but what do you think is the main reason Cade isn't getting to the free throw line? Because I know some of it is the referee thing. Like that's a real thing, like earning that. But he's still a young player. I don't know how to explain it, but for some reason, when he absorbs contact or something, he doesn't sell. I can't explain why he's not.
It doesn't look like when other teams. Yeah.
Is he too big? Like, is it because he's been? I don't know. Do you have a theory behind why he might not be getting to the line as much?
Yeah, I think there is as much as we don't like watching guys like, quite not frankly, Jalen Brunson. Think about the things you saw Jalen Brunson do to get to the free throw line. Think about even watching DeMar DeRozan and think about what he does. DeMar DeRozan, quote unquote, foul hunts. DeMar DeRozan will drive in. He'll throw his arms through the guy who has his hands in the cookie jar, whatever. Cade, either because he hasn't gotten there yet, doesn't want to, whatever. When have you seen Cade really hunt for a foul outside of using a shot fake, right? I'm not saying this is a negative. I just think that's why, if we're excluding the quote unquote star whistle stuff. I think also some guys are actually good at avoiding contact to their detriment. I coached a kid like this in high school, really athletic, really good body control. So when he elevated, he was really good navigating around defenders when they contested, and he never got to the free throw line. The problem was, similar to Cade, he wasn't then great finishing in those situations. I think if Cade finished some of this stuff, the free throw stuff wouldn't matter as much. And I've seen some things that I like, his extension finishes and stuff like that, but it's got to be one or the other. Either he's got to get really good finishing all of this stuff, or he's got to put some of this veteran savvy, I'm going to draw a foul, I'm going to draw contact, and really play to that a little bit more.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And just the last one on Cade, like, is this the most we've seen him post up?
Yes.
Like, I know they wanted to make it a point of emphasis in his second season, and then obviously he missed a lot of the season. Then last year, I don't remember seeing it a whole lot. Like, those post hooks are the hand. Like, do you feel like they're going in every time?
Here's the other thing. You know what? He goes either direction too. Like, that's the thing is, like, we've seen him shoot some with his left. The right hook is automatic, and then he'll spin you baseline if you overplay his hook to the middle. He's really good in the mid post. And then the ones that I just want to encourage people to always keep track of, think about when he gets doubled. Because when he gets doubled, now the defense is in scramble. And even if he doesn't get the assist, a lot of time it's a hockey assist whenever you make a pass out of the post, because it's a pass and then swing. I got to give Tobias Harris more credit for these as well, because he gets some of these also, as much as I don't love Tobias Harris isolations. But yes, and I thought this was a part of his game I wanted to see even when he came in from Oklahoma State. So I'm glad they've played into it.
That was going to be my next question, because I didn't do a lot of scouting on Cade like back then, but it was a somewhat part of his offense at Oklahoma, wasn't it?
It was. I wasn't doing scouting to that degree where I have notes. Like, if you ask me about my Ron Holland scout, I have 2 pages of notes. I wasn't doing it to the extent. But I remember thinking it was like, I remember talking about them using Cade in this way when he was coming out of Oklahoma State. Maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe I just saw him do it in an NBA game and then bought into it. But yeah, it's a real part of his game, and they should definitely continue to play to it.
Yeah, and I love how you brought up there, like the plays he can make when they're doubling him, because
Yes.
wasn't a mid-post possession, but there was 2 of those hockey assists. And shout out to Tim Hardaway Jr., who
thank you.
kicked it across to Beasley twice. Like, those are hockey assists. THJ as well to make the swing pass is also huge. So shout out to him. But I think we've covered Cade. I want to move on now to the coach, JB Bickerstaff.
Sure.
I'll never get tired of these stats for at least this season, but Pistons this time last year were 3-36. They are now 21-19. Like, we've seen these stats after every game, it feels like, but I just need to bring that up because it's still crazy to me. It's the first time they've been above 500 by 2 games, I think, in almost 6 years. My question to you is, what have been some of your favorite aspects of JB's coaching job so far?
So one thing I've loved recently is they've started to play zone, and I like to tell myself that JB reads my Substack, and he read that I've been asking for them to do that, and then he implemented it, which, guys, I'm completely joking. Like, I know
Uh,
that JB Bickerstaff does not read my Substack, and that absolutely this was always part of the progression. But I love teams that go zone after timeout or whenever the other team has found a rhythm and just to switch it up. And so I like that part of what he's done defensively. I will say this. I've only got to go to one game, the game in Denver. JB's personality was very infectious. Like, it was something that when he walked in the room for the media, I just appreciated like his personality and his demeanor and everything about that. Like, he even answered the question about Mike Brown getting fired in a very direct, and like you could tell he was kind of upset for his friend. But I didn't even like, he just knows how, like, he was pleasant to be in the room with in that scenario. And I have to imagine that's the case at practice and the locker room and everything else with these guys. There's some offensive things, but I feel like he has let him push the pace at times. I think in general, they're still, 19th, nothing crazy. He has run some really nice out of timeout sets. I wish some more of them were for Cade Cunningham, but I can appreciate that he wants to run them for the vet. So they've run some really interesting sets that I've liked as well.
Yeah, I think his personality, like that's something, and this isn't even a thing directed at the past coaches at all, but just when you talk to people like who've been in the room with him, like yourself or any of the beat reporters or that, like just the demeanor and like he's just a very open and has time for everyone, which
Yep.
I think would clearly extend to his playing group. And you see them playing as hard as they ever have for a coach, at least the ones who've been around for a minute. And I
I
agree
also,
that. Oh yeah, go
I
ahead.
I just say real quick, I got a chance to meet Trajan as well. Amari introduced me. And then afterwards, standing in the hallway, Trajan walked by, and he could have just kept walking, right? He walked over, shook my hand, said, "Nice to meet you." And then, like, just very,
Yeah.
but it was very pleasurable, very friendly. Like, I appreciate, and listen, like, Trajan was like my idol growing up. I told this story on the Pistons Pulse, but I used to play as Trajan Langdon in my driveway when I was doing my March Madness
Wow.
brackets and stuff like that. So I've got to do a lot of cool things, as you have as well. Meeting Trajan Langdon in person was one of the top moments I've got from what this has created for me to do.
That's amazing. Another thing about Trajan, so when the Pistons hired him as a president of basketball operations, or is that whatever his title is, but I was working at the NBL at the time, and our head of content was a massive Trajan Langdon fan, and he just
Okay.
would not stay. He was so excited. He loved EuroLeague basketball, this guy, and he was just so hyped. And you're so right. Like, the thing with Trajan is you'll hear, like, I've just heard some things about like the connectivity he's brought to the organization as a whole, not just
Yeah.
basketball, but like the entire place. He's really like brought that place together. He's not the only one, but it goes back to like what you said about him just stopping to say hello when he could have walked past. Like those little things, like, yeah, great call to shout him out because he's been incredible as well.
Yeah.
And just last one on JB. I think Kenny Atkinson's like in a league of his own for coach of the year, but JB, I don't know what is it. Do they have a top 5 at the end? I'm not sure if it's top 5,
I don't
top
know.
3, but he's got to be in the top 5 maybe right
Yeah,
now.
I would think so.
Coach of the year.
The other name that I think the only two names I can think of off the top as I pull up the standings that I would put above him, Atkinson, and then listen, Jamal Mosley does an awesome job in Orlando. Like, that team has sustained so many injuries to their best players, and they're still fourth in the East right now and 5 games above 500. So those two guys, that's probably it. Like, right? I mean, Ime's doing a good job with Houston as well, but I would give
Yeah.
JB the nod right now. It might be top 3 as we sit here right today. I think top 3 is. I feel comfortable with that. I think.
Which is just like, I mean, I'm not sure. What was your preseason, like before the season? How many wins were you thinking?
I'm about to be real wrong. I think I said 30 was like my high end expectation, and I expected it to be somewhere between 26 and 28. Like double their win total was kind of where I landed. Here's the funny thing about this too is, what if JB and Kenny Atkinson went 1-2 in the voting? Like JB gets fired from Cleveland. Kenny goes there. That ends up being the right move, but then hiring JB for a different team, it also ends up being the right move. Like and listen, I've listened to Cleveland podcasts. They will support JB. Like it was interesting. They were on the Dunker Spot, a couple guys, and they were like, we want to be adamant that we were JB fans, even though it still may have made sense to move on and bring in somebody new. So he ended up being the perfect guy for this, it seems like.
He really did. Like I must admit, when the hire came through, like I told myself, no matter who it is, I'm not getting excited after going crazy for Monty. But he's blown my expectations out of the water. Not just with the record, but just the way you see the team playing for him and everything we've kind of spoken about before. He's doing an incredible job. You brought up a name before in Ron Holland.
Yeah.
Ron, I absolutely love Ron, but where I want to go with this was, what was your pre-draft scout on him?
Okay.
And when the Pistons selected him, what were your initial thoughts?
So I was one of the higher people on Ron Holland for a lot of the cycle. And then as I started doing more and more mocks, I found myself not drafting him as high because I'm like, okay, who can afford to bring in this player who doesn't space the floor where there's shooting questions, right? So I moved him a little bit lower. But I said, like, if you want a two-way wing in this draft, Ron Holland is the guy you should draft. What are the chances he hits those outcomes? I don't know. But if that's what you're looking for, which most NBA teams are, he's the one. I didn't think he was a great fit for Detroit. I will admit that. Now, it made a little more sense when you add Malik Beasley and you add Tim Hardaway Jr. and you add Tobias Harris. And it's like, and Jaden Ivey shooting 40% from three, right? Yeah. Like if J.I. was still at 30%, I don't think we'd all be as comfortable with where things are at right now. So let me read this real quick and we'll see how right I was. Athletic and explosive wing. I do not think he's a forward, but interested to see what he officially measures at, who has the potential to be a high volume scorer and defensive playmaker. I do believe he'll be mostly off the ball player who want to create advantages for and then allow him to attack those opportunities. Will get the reputation as a quote unquote selfish player based on his assist to turnover numbers, but I believe those to be misleading in terms of that specifically. The questions around his feel for game are much more warranted. Defensively, he is a player that will make plays and be disruptive, but will need to work on the fundamentals of this to end up simply being more solid in situations that ask for it. I would say my biggest miss is I think he's better at the point of attack, solid defense than what I originally thought.
Can I just say, why are you not working for an NBA team? No, I'm being legit. I feel like you've hit the nail on the head. I was trying to wait for something that was going to really stick out to me. Like, I get the point of attack stuff, but I don't think most people would realize that. That's pretty, like, that's bang on. Like, I
hope so. Listen,
look, it is.
I watched a lot of Ron going back to high school as well, and so that probably helps with my evaluation. And we talked about this on the Pistons Pulse, Jack, was what we're seeing attitude and I say attitude in a positive way, and mentality from Ron Holland is not going to change if he becomes a star. This has always been who Ron Holland was this like dog is the way, people like to say it, like get after you, doesn't back down. He was a high level high school rated player who part of the rep was he plays extremely hard. And so this is never going to change, even if he does become a 20, 25 point a game scorer.
It's so true. And that's what Draymond Green said that after the Warriors game. Like, he was like, that's my dog, as in Ron. He's like, I went and watched him at like a high school tournament. And he's like, I immediately knew like that kid, he's the one on the court because of the effort, the hustle, and the attitude in the best way possible, like you said. But I think the biggest surprise for me with Ron, and I know you've been big on this as well when talking about Ron on other shows, but he's finishing at the rim.
Yeah.
Like, whether it's in transition or even the half court, like, so Basketball Reference within 3 feet has him at 76% as of today. Yep. And I even thought his season's kind of gone how like Summer League did, where early on he struggled trying to find his feet, trying to find his role. But then by the end of Summer League, he was putting up 20 points and still struggling to shoot, but he looked more in control and the finishing was a bit better. I feel like we're seeing the same on a larger scale this season. Just thoughts on the finishing, because he feels like an automatic bucket in transition, and it's incredible.
I mean, Ron and Asar in transition is really, really exciting because, listen, Asar Thompson pushes pace and creates a lot of open looks in transition. So I think the biggest area of growth for me is what I wanted to see is, can he take what we see in transition and can he apply it to the half court, right? Because you can't play every possession in transition. And what we saw even in that Knicks game, he had two really tough finishes in that game. One with his left hand, which I was looking through my notes and I actually made a note of quite a few left-hand attempts, even if not always successful. So we've seen him have some success and be willing to go to that left. And then he had one where he squared up OG, crossed him over, got downhill, and finished again. He also, one of his most impressive plays was actually a pass. He missed a three. Somebody tipped out an offensive rebound. He drives in, boom, dumps it off to Stu. Stu finishes. What he's doing in the half court all of a sudden is what has me excited. And I don't know how you feel, Jack. I don't think the jumper's broke. I know the percentages aren't great, but I think there's plenty to work with there that Fred Vinson will get. I expect a really solid jump from him next year.
Yeah, the jumper, I'm not sure what it's at since December 1st now, but a few games ago, it was at 40% on low volume. Overall, like you said, it still looks low. I think it's at like 23%, but it looks legit. Like, as long as he's not, like, I'm happy with him shooting all the open threes he wants. There was a game the other night where he took like 6 or 7 3-point attempts of like his 9 total attempts. I'd like that a bit more even, but if he's shooting 2 or 3 wide open, like the mechanics, I just have a newfound confidence in him when he's shooting it to be like, that's a good shot. Like, I'm not going, no. Like, in all honesty, I sometimes do with a SAR still, but it's that confidence and that mentality is why I just feel like there is a real, like, I'm still very high on Jaden Ivey, but part of me thinks like maybe Ron could be that number 3 scorer when this team's really, really winning with Cade, or maybe number 2. I don't know if I want to go that far, but yeah.
And that confidence is where I have a lot of belief in Ron Holland as well, because it does not waver. His confidence is, and listen, to be a pro in the NBA, I'll tell you, I've learned you got to have unwavering confidence or you're going to be gone, because it takes that, and they have no time for lack of confidence. This is why I want them to stand pat. Data collection is my coin phrase for this season. I want to see, what if Ron is a number 2? What if he is, Jack? If Ron is a number 2, and you can fit J.I. into a number 3, and those guys shoot at even a reasonable clip, then you can absolutely have a SAR on the floor with them. You don't need to trade for anybody else. You don't need to go make a big move. Now, what's the likelihood of that? I don't know. Probably not great, but there's a world where it can figure it out, or you can live in that world for a couple seasons, and then maybe it's not going to get you to a championship, so then you make a trade. But if you told me this team can be a playoff team with some of these young guys playing together, I think I would believe that. Maybe it doesn't hit the ceiling with those guys, but I want more data on this before I start to like move one of them or do something where I add in something over the top.
No, and I'm with you, because I think when they were sitting around that 10 and 16 mark, and when they have been losing before, it was like, oh, well, Cade's only 24, it's going to be 25, whatever. You need to get a winning team around him and need to make a move. And I did see some like merit in that argument, but now It's like, well, they're winning.
Yeah.
They could very well make the 6th seed if everything hits. So it's like, Cade, they're winning. Cade's getting the recognition. He wants to be here. So why not let them keep growing with this young core? Because that was going to be my next question. There was those reports or rumors that the Pistons are now looking to be buyers. I kind of feel like I know your answer on that. But how did you interpret those kind of reports?
Yeah. So real quick, the one thing I will say is we're going to find a lot over the rest of the month. Trajan's going to get a lot of data against some really good teams through the rest of January, just in time before the deadline to make a decision on this. So this could change over the next couple of weeks, right? My take on that report was Brandon Ingram or Zach LaVine's agents were probably the best to benefit from those reports. And so that was my initial thought, as I've learned how this game is played throughout the media, is the first thing you think of is when a report like that comes out, who benefits the most? right? And if you're trying to drum up attention for and competition for Zach LaVine or Brandon Ingram or somebody like that, you say that the Pistons are buyers because those are, names that have been linked there. And it was kind of like the last couple off seasons, Jack. Remember when every free agent was linked to Detroit?
Yeah.
Why? Because they had salary cap, and so they were going to be used as leverage. So I could see them being small. Couldn't you see Trajan going ahead and deciding like, hey, I want to go get Bruce Brown, or I want to go get somebody like that, and be buyers in that way of somebody that moves the needle just a little bit to make sure you get into the playoff scenario?
Yeah, so I'll give credit to, once again, our man Kyle Metz, because when I was chatting to him the other night, when people see those reports, they think those couple of names that you brought up, Zach LaVine and Brandon Ingram. But Kyle, and I agree with him on this point, he was like, I think it more means Trajan now is willing to go get a contract for a player that actually helps you solidify maybe a playoff position and the chance to win a playoff game, as opposed to just bringing in complete dead money for a year or year and a half with a pick.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I settle on it.
Where it's probably like they actually have a plus of second round picks, especially out in the future. And so I think that's what you could see is, maybe it is a player like there's not very many I'd want to move. Fontecchio, maybe, just because I feel like it hasn't quite been what I thought it was going to be with him, even though he's had some moments here recently. But, could you attach the right salary and go get, another one? I'm doing this mock trade deadline thing that's actually a lot of fun. One that was offered to me actually included Dante Exum. And I was like, okay, that's kind of interesting if he's healthy, because expiring deal, he can handle the ball and he can play defense. Okay, that seems like a role that this team could use.
For sure. And the name, you guys actually threw it out in the Game Theory pod. It was in a 3-team trade with the Heat, Memphis, and the Pistons. But the Pistons got Marcus Smart.
Yeah.
And Memphis would get Butler, and I can't remember the full thing of the trade. But that was Marcus Smart to me as well. I don't know how likely that is, but that's a player as well. I think he's got 2 years left. Fills a void with the ball handling. 3-point shots a bit iffy, but I feel like he could also settle into a bench role when JI comes back potentially next season or end of this season. So, yeah, I think we're kind of aligned with what we expect, or an outcome that could happen. But
Jack, if they make a big move, I want it to be this summer. You know what I mean? Like, I'm okay if the data you get the rest of this season then points you towards that big move, then that's my appetite. Because the other thing we don't know right now, we have no idea where this first round pick is going to land, or if they get it at all. So get that information, figure out where Malik Beasley is going to be. And then if you want to make a big move, do it this coming. Somebody's going to be available this offseason. Like these guys, we never have the names for the next one to come available, but they always do.
Absolutely. No, that's a great way to put a bow on this, because if you make the playoffs, get rid of that pick, you have all your first rounders back to trade. You then can go to players and be like, we just made the playoffs. We've got a player that might have got to All NBA third team, All Star. It makes more sense. You've got all the data which you've spoken about. So I think I'm definitely with you on that now. But final topic here before I get to some quick personal questions to wrap up the show. Just a minute or two on the 2022 draft class. Jalen Duren and Jaden Ivey. Just a minute or so on each of what you've seen this season from each of them.
Yeah, I mean, it stinks that J.I. went down when he did because he was shooting the ball so well. I mean, he's over 40% right now as we sit here. And I know it was a little bit up and down. I think that would be my biggest thing with J.I. was the consistency wasn't there. And we saw him during one of his up trends right before he got hurt. And so it would be nice to see how long he could keep those going. And that really stinks because I came into the year saying the biggest thing you needed to find out this year was what is J.I., what is J.D., Jalen Duren, a lot of what I do is I just evaluate him defensively. I think we kind of know what he is on offense, right? We know he has great chemistry with Cade on offense. We know he can be a rebounder. I don't think the offensive game is going to ever catapult to what I thought whenever I scouted him pre-draft. And so I think we know that. I thought he made strides defensively over the last couple of weeks until that Knicks game. And then we saw his kryptonite in that Knicks game, which is a floor spacing big. And I don't know about you, Jack, but watching Stu be that much better than him defensively in that game was I cheer for all of the guys to be successful, and it was frustrating to watch him struggle so much.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, as soon as Jay got into foul trouble, truthfully, I just thought it was a blessing in disguise because
Yeah.
I just knew Stu is just much more equipped to defend kind of any big, but especially stretch bigs. The thing with JD that frustrated me, man, is so Cat hit a three early on, and then another possession later, JD's up in his grill, but his hands are by his side. I'm like, JD, just put your hands up, brother. And
So
like, and I know you're big on this with his hand activity and drop and pick and roll, but even just closing out, like his body was in the right position, but his hands are by his side. I'm like, oh, so frustrating.
I clipped it out. It's in the Substack. I had to clip it because I'm like, you're exactly right, Jack. You're spot on. He was there and he just refused to put his hands up. Because that's the thing, right? If you could pause the clip and you can see the contest right there, I think we're all pretty understanding, right? I mean, no matter what the situation is, it wasn't. He just didn't put his hand up. And then I think what was hard to watch was he couldn't guard Cat off the bounce. And it almost made you understand why he's scared to close out to these stretch bigs. It's because I don't think he trusts himself to move his feet and stay in front of him if they give him a shot fake and go off the dribble. And the way the NBA is going, the way the league is going, you got to be able to defend that in some capacity. And quite frankly, I think that's a bigger concern than the drop coverage stuff at this point is just being able to defend pick and pop bigs.
It's been really interesting, like watching him from when he was a rookie to now, because athletically, I feel like the consensus for people who watch Pistons basketball is that JD's athletic. But something that's really stood out to me over the past season and a half is he just doesn't have the speed laterally or to slide. And like you pointed out, like Cat got him a number of times yesterday. And I think everything you said then makes so much sense with why he's so hesitant to close out.
Real quick, I mean, who would you say is more athletic between if you posted on Twitter, you have a bigger following than me. If you put out a poll of who's more athletic, Jalen Duren or Isaiah Stewart, Jalen Duren would win that by 80-20, 90-10. But who do you trust to guard Jalen Duren in isolation? Or excuse me, Jalen Brunson in isolation, right?
Stu.
It's not even close. Or close out to a pick and pop big and then be able to slide and cut off it. Like that's where, and I'm guilty of this as well. That's where athleticism is a more nuanced conversation than we sometimes make it.
Absolutely. Jay, like I thought his energy's been better recently, but there was Cat's probably the biggest kryptonite he could have.
Yes. It really is.
It was always going to be a struggle, but Bryce, probably got another couple of minutes here before I let you go, but we've got a few questions here, a couple of personal questions. I've titled them. But first one off the rank here.
Okay.
What would drive you more insane? A poorly kept lawn that you couldn't touch for 2 months, or eating food that is touching for 1 month?
You know me too well. The poorly kept lawn. I wouldn't be able to pull up to my house. It would start my day wrong in the morning. I don't like it right now. I literally took the trash out before you and I recorded, and my lawn is, over here, it's winter. For us, my lawn is brown and, it gets matted down because it snows and the kids play on it and all of that. And it depressed me. So easily the lawn, man.
So just to confirm, you're going to eat food that's touching for a month.
Yeah.
Okay. You're not even laughing. You're disgusted at the fact that thought of a lawn.
You ruined my night, Jack. You're like, I'm depressed. So I don't know what I'm going to do.
I love it. Okay. So next question, biggest draft hit and biggest draft miss so far. I think you've been doing like real type scouting for at least 3 drafts.
So, 4. Last year was actually the first year I put a board together. We're gonna have to go off of last year so far. Let's look at this. So if you just go by where they got drafted, I was 11 spots wrong on Dalton Connect. I was 11 spots too high on Connect. I was way too high on Kyle Filipowski as well.
He ended up going second round, didn't he?
Second round. Yep. And I had him as he was 14 on my board. The other direction would probably be Dillingham and Zach Edey. I don't feel like I'm going to end up being wrong on Dillingham still. I would say Zach Edey is probably my biggest miss of that class, along with Jalen Wells. Jalen Wells is my biggest miss from the 2024 draft. I had him as a second round pick, but I didn't have him starting on a playoff contender or playoff team, like legit playoff team. So that's my big. I think the one I'm going to still be right about is Alex Sarr. I had Alex Sarr number 1 on my board. I think he's still going to end up being good. And so that's definitely not a hit right now, but I think it's going to end up being a hit.
I love it. And is there anyone that comes to mind from prior drafts? I know you didn't do a board, but is there anyone you were just like, man, I was right on him or I was wrong?
Yeah, let me just look through drafts. I was right about Victor. Does that count?
Oh, man.
Let's see. Nothing crazy there. I'm still waiting to see what happens with Cam Whitmore. I want to be justified with that one because I had him really, really high in that draft. Let me go back another year, 2022 NBA draft. Let's look through these names. Oh, I was right on Paolo. That's one I was right on.
Yeah, actually, you were big. He was always, I feel like, number 1 for you.
Yep, he was. So I feel good about that. I was probably a little wrong on Chet there. I feel like Benedict Mathurin has been good. I feel like I was probably okay there. Shaden Sharp, no. I didn't have that one right. Jalen Williams came out of nowhere for me. J-Dub with the Thunder.
Yeah.
Tari Eason. Tari Eason's a name. I was not a Tari Eason guy in that draft. So that would be a miss for me in that class.
Got you. Oh, they're pretty good. I mean, last year's draft class was like, I mean, I wouldn't forgive you. I don't know what Sam's, I know he does that kind of grading. I don't know what he's ended up being, but that draft class was, I'll be honest, I didn't pay much attention because
I loved it. Yeah. I thought it was fun because like this year is fun too, because after you get past the top 4 or 5, it gets a little crazy. But I thought last year was fun just because it's like, who knows, right? Like there's so many different paths you can. Here's the other, like I had Jared McCain at 16, which is where he went. But right now, based off what we've seen so far, I know he's injured. He's going to return bigger value than that.
Yeah, I forgot about him. He's out for the rest of the season, isn't he, with the MCL or something like that?
I think he may return.
Okay.
But he's out.
He was incredible.
Extended time for sure.
Got you. All right. Next question. Best player you played with or against at American University? We played against Blake.
Yeah. So sort of. I'm cherry picking. I was still recovering from my torn ACL. So I didn't actually get to play in that game, but we opened my senior year at Oklahoma for Blake's sophomore year when they were really good. They killed us. He had like 7 top ESPN SportsCenter top 10 plays in that game. He's about the only player I've ever stepped on the floor if I would have and been intimidated. I was legit intimidated by him. Let's see. Other NBA players I played against, Roy Hibbert. We beat Grievous Vasquez. If people remember Grievous Vasquez, he was at Maryland. We actually upset them at Maryland. It was actually the best collegiate game I had. So those are some NBA guys I played against.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie.
DeJuan Summers. DeJuan Summers, right? Wasn't he a Piston? DeJuan Summers. I'm pretty sure.
The last name rings a bell, but
yeah, he got drafted by the Pistons.
There you go.
Second round pick, DeJuan Summers. He was my matchup when we played Georgetown. And lots of times people lie about their heights. So the scouting report said he was like 6'8", 230 or whatever. I was like, oh, okay. Like, yeah, sure. I walked on the court for the jump ball. I was like, oh no, he's like actually 6. And I'm 6'6", 220 at this time. But I'm like, oh Lord, he's actually 6'8", 230 like this. And then Hibbert's 7'4" monster. And it's like, oh man, this is a lot. So
I love it. Well, I'm just going to give you a heads up. That Blake Griffin story might be getting cut up into a video of its own. Because that is awesome insight.
Yeah. Real quick, when we played my first year, when we played the NCAA tournament, we played Tennessee. Bruce Pearl was the head coach at Tennessee. And we're going through the handshake lines after the game. They ended up beating us. And he stops and he asked me if I'm Jewish. I was like, that is the most random question I've ever been asked in my life. And I was just like, no. He's like, oh, okay. And we moved on. Well, I had to Google it. And it turns out he's Jewish and he coaches this like Maccabi games or something like that. And so I don't know if he was going to ask me to play on a team or how all that works or whatever. But I was like, oh, it was a very random interaction that I had no idea until I was able to Google it and find out. So, yeah, so some pretty cool interactions. So
definitely, that's awesome.
Jack,
That's
Blake,
awesome insight.
When we walked into the gym, Blake Griffin was warming up and drenched in sweat. And this dude is a monster. Like he is, everybody's seen him. Everybody understands. Like it was so intimidating. He's going through his pregame routine like he doesn't have a game that day. And it was just like this guy. And he's just such a physical specimen, so athletic. Like, and the other thing is his brother was on that team who was pretty athletic as well. So, very athletic Oklahoma team that blasted us by 40.
Was their dad the coach as well? Or no? No, maybe I'm
no, not in college.
So. Yeah. No, okay. But yeah, I remember his older brother. No, Blake, the one I had one NCAA basketball game here in Australia, and it was the year Blake might have been 09 or 10. I can't remember. Maybe 08. But yeah, he was on it, and I was like, who is this guy?
Yeah.
So,
yes.
But okay, a couple more here. I promise we're wrapping up. Favorite moment so far covering the Pistons? Can be anything, a play, an interaction, anything.
I tell myself never to underappreciate when I get to go to a game credentialed and sitting on the sideline before the games, going into the media room, meeting all of these people. Like, listen, like people are going to be, it's truly the relationships I've got to build. Like real friends, people like you, watching your growth and what you've become from where you started. Like we all start pretty much with nothing. Like, I don't mean that to say, but like you just all of a sudden start building a following, you start a podcast and you see how it goes. That's truly like all of that stuff is that's why I keep doing it, to be honest. Like I love it, but it's a lot of that. Like walking into a gym, I'm sure you've experienced this, and like people yell your name and want to say hello because they listen to the podcast. Like, are you kidding me? Like, I'm a nobody in Southwest Kansas and people are excited to like say what's up because we share this Piston stuff. So that's what it is. Truly. That's all of those moments are what it is.
I love it. And I'm with you. Like, it's so cool. Like here in Australia, like just getting a chat to yourself about Pistons basketball and like everyone in the Pistons community, the creators, and just meeting people, like the few I've got to meet in person so far, who I'm sure I'm going to meet more sometime in the future. Like it's awesome. It's like, it's something you just keep coming back for. It's just part of you now. It's why I'm doing it, trying to do it full time. Cause it's like, I was at the NBL and I'm like, I just can't give up this Pistons thing. I can't.
Yeah.
So,
the fan base is cool as heck, man. Like they come out, they love it, and they're accepting of it. And there's so much good content creation, and they're taking in all of it to keep all of us going. Right. There's plenty to go around. So I love it. It's so much fun.
Last one, and then I'll let you get out of here. I promise. Best piece of advice for Pistons or NBA content creators. I'm sure people will reach out to you. Like, what's just one piece of advice you would give to them if they were getting started?
Work really hard and find what you're good at. We joked at the top that when you were trying to find how to, describe my content, and I said boring. But the thing was, like, I never tried to venture away from that. Some people are a little more entertaining. Some people, that's their thing. That's not me. I knew that coming in, that I'm not funny. I'm not going to wow you with my personality or something like that. But I told myself when this all started that I was going to stay true to my personality, which was, I just want to talk hoops. And the other thing I'll say this is probably my better piece of advice. Every opportunity, look at everything as an opportunity, no matter what. Free, whether it's money, I did everything for free when I started out, Jack, and I'm sure you did as well, right? And I never thought I would make money doing this, but I've grown into that a little bit. I had somebody, and this was probably one of the more disappointing. I reached out to somebody about something and they turned me down because they literally said to me, what is in this for me? And I wanted to say to that person, a relationship, somewhere along the lines, it'll pay back, an opportunity. And take advantage of every single one, right? That's why when you reached out to me 4 years ago, if you were willing to care enough about my opinion to reach out to me, who am I not to respond? So that would be my take advantage of every opportunity, because you never know what it may turn into.
Perfectly said. Couldn't agree more. Yeah, if anyone reaches out, like I'll try my absolute best. Like I'm actually having a chat with someone in a couple of hours who it's like a full circle moment. They're reaching out to me. I'm like, what the hell? But it's like, like it's lovely they would reach out, and I would just want to help them as much as I can, like you did for me, and I'm sure others have done for you. It's so true. Everything's an opportunity, and I love how you brought up the money factor as well, because you should, at your core, I feel like you want to do this for free. You do it
Yeah.
for free, and
Sure.
it might not be as big a part of your life if you do it for free, but like, yeah, I
And
love
don't
that
be,
advice.
Jack, don't be, I would say, don't be afraid to reach out. And the
Yeah.
thing is, you're going to get some no responses, right? Like,
Oh yeah.
and your inbox is way more busy than mine, and Koo's is crazy. Like I know this. And so maybe it doesn't always, I can't tell you how many non-responses I've got, but I wouldn't have got some of the yeses I did. The KOC thing, like I he followed me for whatever reason, and I immediately reached out. I sent him a DM and just said, "Hey KOC, appreciate the follow, love what you're doing, whatever." Like I don't know if that's why he ended up asking me on or not, but I saw an opportunity and I took advantage of it just to say hello and introduce myself. And that's paid off way more than the times where I've reached out and somebody's quote unquote big time me, or not had the time for me or whatever.
No, it's so true. And I'll just finish this here. Like I think I DM'd, it might have been Howard Beck, who I think's at the Ringer now. This is a while ago. And obviously no response for a while. He
Yeah.
got back to me 6 months later,
Yeah.
and he
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
said, "Sorry, Jack, I missed this." So a lot of the time as well, people just don't get to it. So don't be discouraged if you don't get a response in a day or two, because it doesn't mean they're big timing you. It just means they've just doing something else, and they might get back to you when they do. But don't ever let that stop you from reaching out to anyone.
Yep, I agree 100%. Listen, over at the Game Theory, I had somebody reach out about offering some services to the podcast over there, just cold DM to me. They had emailed Sam like 12 times or something like that. And Sam has ADHD, and he would say this himself. So he's like awful sometimes Sam doesn't respond to me, and I'm his co-host. But I think something's going to end up happening for this person with Game Theory. And it was complete cold DMs and emails and stuff like that. Like you got to be willing to hear no, you got to be willing to do work for free. But the other thing is stay true to yourself. I had people tell me, "Oh, you got to be a little more hot takey." And I'm like, listen, if that's what it takes for me to grow, then I'm not doing it. Like I'm going to talk about basketball the way I want to talk about. And so far it's paid off.
Definitely. Perfect advice. I could keep talking about this for a minute, but because I love this part of the show. But just that's such good advice for anyone watching that wants to get into the space. Like everything Bryce just said, then take that and run with it. But that's going to do it for today's show, Bryce. Been an absolute pleasure. I'm sure everyone knows where they can find you, but just tell everyone what you've got going on. Sometimes I don't know what you're doing. There's stuff everywhere as show. Like, I don't know how you do it with your life, but just tell everyone what you've got going on and where they can find your work.
Yeah, at MotorCity Hoops on Twitter, on Blue Sky. Guys, I would appreciate a subscribe over on Substack, motorcityhoops.substack.com. It's completely free. Like it's literally notes I was taking anyway for me whenever I come on podcasts like Jack's, and I put them out for you guys now, some videos behind it. So subscribe, read those, analysis. There'll be other stuff when we get to round draft time and all of that. The Pistons Pulse with Amari, my guy, of course, and then the Game Theory podcast with Sam Vecini, and the only thing I actually push, the only narrative I have, the only agenda I have in the NBA is to make B Bobbler the official bobblehead of the NBA, or at least the Detroit Pistons. So support B Bobbler. You can say I have narratives. You can say I have agendas. I don't, other than this, because look how spot on that is.
Hey, I don't know if there's anyone else in the content space with a bobblehead, and I know it's from coaching, but
yeah,
that's a tribute to who you are, man. So thank you so much for joining. That's going to
Yep.
do it for today's show, guys. If you could please like, subscribe, drop a comment, support the channel, support Bryce in any way you can. It just helps us continue to keep pushing. But until next time, as always, go Pistons. Thanks so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and drop a comment below.